Atsenuwa. You're welcome to Freshly Pressed, and the analysts are set already for us to get dig into the papers. Well, it's teamy hard, but let's welcome Ikemesit Effiong. Good morning to you, Ikemesit.
Good morning, Omatseye. Morning, Lagos. Glad to be with you.
I have AB Bozimo is also here. Good morning, AB. Good morning, AB. Say something if you can hear us.
Hi, good morning, Omatseye. Hi, good morning, Omatseye, Ikemesit, and Lagos in general. Let's enjoy the show.
All right, gentlemen, let's dig into the papers. First one, Premium Times, and I come to you, AB, for this one. Niger coup, Nigerian senators reject Tinubu's request for troops deployment. That's according to the Premium Times. A little intro. Senators have rejected the request by President Bola Tinubu for permission to deploy Nigerian troops to Niger as a part of an ECOWAS force to reinstate the democratically elected president of that country. Walk us through it, AB.
Yes, the news has been rife with this coup that happened a week plus ago, and the activities of ECOWAS led by, at this point, the Nigerian president. And Nigerian efforts have been seeping into the media with the alleged deployment of troops to a northern state and, the threat to the coup plotters that they will be flushed out. There have been things like shutting off power to that country, diplomatic relations being cancelled and all that. And the Nigerian president has, shown a certain willingness to go ahead with these efforts. But it does appear that certain senators, at least led by some of the northern senators, have cautioned the president about the potential negative impact of taking on these coup plotters with military force. They have counseled strenuously that diplomatic means are the best. They have said, and it's a very troubling admission, they said our military is ill-equipped and ill-prepared. This is a quote from the story. They say our military is ill-equipped and ill-prepared for such a military excursion. And the question we raised, what seems to be our direct national interest in seeking a war, a kinetic war against coups? Let's say this, coups are not good. We're not looking for coups to happen anywhere, or certainly nowhere closer to us. But we seem to be taking this leadership role where maybe forgiven for taking us as the main aggressors. And it's very to build narrative where we are now their target, because they may not be able to take on the whole of Nigeria, but they can take on some of our compatriots in the north. Think about it further. If there is more instability in Niger, they have been one of the places that has cooperated with Nigeria against some of the terroristic tendencies from all over the world, including Africa. If they decide to let those people free, our brethren in some of the northern states and indeed anywhere else to be under threat. So I say, in this rush to fight, I do applaud the senator's stance. They have said, cool down, let's use every other possible means to address this constitutional aberration, which is a coup. It is a wrong thing. But you cannot, how do they say it in local parlance, you cannot take Panadol for somebody else's headache. You have headaches in your own country. The country is dealing with a lot. People here would find it hard to support your efforts. And trust me, a war is not fought with mouth, it's fought with money, resources that are begging to be used in Nigeria. You want to now take them elsewhere. I think charity ought to start at home.
Abi, before I drift on to Ikemesit for the next item, but then one is poised to ask, what Nigeria's defense budget, from estimates I've seen, seems to be larger than that of Niger Republic. So what have we been doing with defense budgets? And the capacity in which the president is leading this charge is not just from a Nigerian perspective, but also being the leader of the regional body, and match that with his words when he came into power, when he was in his acceptance speech of the position as the chair of ECOWAS, saying coups are no longer accepted as a means. So don't you think if the regional body doesn't stand up, this would trigger yet another one and another one again in the region?
Well, I don't have any disagreement with the nature of the statements and preachments and announcements, but President Tinubu thus far has shown himself to be a president of announcements, and then execution has lagged far behind. Case in point, we have things like the subsidy removal, the other policies here in Nigeria. So it's okay. As it seems, he's comfortable making pronouncements. We're getting used to that about him. I am saying execution of a war is no child's play, and thorough consideration should be applied before running in there, bumbling, and thinking you can just kick them out, and that becomes a protracted thing. I think caution, as the Senate has requested, is appropriate.
Thank you so much, AB. For the listener, you can be part of this conversation. We expect to read your messages as you contribute to the Freshly Pressed this morning on 0809-444-0981. WhatsApp messages only. Ikemesit, we're next at your terrain with this piece here from the Punch newspaper. ECOWAS, and it's a link-up story also to the fresh story we took now. ECOWAS can justify intervention in Niger without UN's approval. That's according to the Punch. And human rights lawyer Femi Falana is the one mouthing this.
Yes, so basically, Falana, in a statement she released yesterday, said that ECOWAS's conduct as a regional arrangement is subject to the provisions of the United Nations Charter. Every ECOWAS member state is a member of the United Nations and signed up to that charter, particularly Article 53 subsection 1. So his basic argument is that in addition to, like AB was suggesting, right, getting the sign up of senators before military conflict is authorized, ECOWAS is also required to seek and obtain the authorization of the UN Security Council to launch an attack on a United Nations sovereign member state pursuant to the UN Charter. And so basically, the argument is that all of the preconditions, right, for the institution of any sort of military or kinetic intervention in Niger has not yet been fulfilled. And so we're still a far way off from any sort of active boots on the ground intervention, which is what I've been saying for a while. I know that a lot of the commentariat and a lot of the commentary, especially here domestically in Nigeria, are circled around military intervention, but the constitutional, the legislative bar, the regional coalition that you need to put together in order to make this work, and they sign up from key international bodies at these stumbling blocks. There's also the matter of the operational preparations that need to be in effect, right? ECOWAS does have a standby military force, right? But I do not know enough of Nigerian operational military doctrine for me to definitively say that we have a plan on paper. For example, if any sort of intervention needs to happen in any of our neighbors, there are countries who are more into intervening in domestic affairs of other countries tend to have, well laid out doctrine that clearly spells out what such a country would do in the effect that military action is necessary. We've generally been a good neighbor, maybe not so much on the economic front, but certainly militarily, right? Yeah, we don't have any natural enemies. And so I don't know that operationally, and our military has been more insular and more inward focused. The military is deployed in some sort of military operation or in some sort of, policing support capacity in every Nigerian state, and this includes the Federal Capital Territory, right? So we've been, certainly since the heyday of the military interventions of the 1990s in Liberia and Sierra Leone, our military has been more internally focused and maybe contributing, troops to peacekeeping missions in places like Congo and in Sudan and in Haiti and other parts of the world. We've been more internally focused, and we've certainly, when we've looked externally, we've not looked at Benin, Niger, or Cameroon. So in that sense, I don't know that there's any plan that already exists on the ground that probably needs to be tweaked here and there. So there's a really high bar. And this is one thing that I really want to drive home. There's a really high bar before Abuja can get to the point where it starts sending troops into other countries. You need to plan, you need to provision, like AB said, resources are at play, both financially and also in terms of food and material and weapons. And so, and apparently, Falana has reminded us over the weekend, we also need to fulfill international law and our commitments as a UN member state. So many moving parts in order for this to happen.
Okay, thank you very much, Ikemesit. And I go now to AB for this next one from the Guardian newspaper. Human Rights Watch carpets Tinubu over bloated incoming cabinet. We're going to have close to about 48 or thereabout ministers eventually when the confirmation is done. So, AB, is this out of order or necessity is what is bringing this up and we must live with it?
This incoming cabinet list looks more like a thank you package. It does not necessarily. I contrast Nigeria's population of 200 plus million, so early 200 plus million, and the US population of maybe 300 plus million, a much larger landmass over there. They have about 15 cabinet secretaries, as their ministers are called. We have 48. Somehow their human development and economic indices have been adequately managed with that 15 plus. Of course, there are lots of other people and departments, but 15 heads. We have 48 people. We had one of the former ministers who, as he was leaving, said the idea of Minister of State was not right. He's now back. We don't know what kind of minister he will be. But the point seemed like a lot of redundancy. People who just have, in this story, a potential $23 billion a month shall be the wage bill. This is separate from the vehicles that each of these people shall get. Each minister apparently has a convoy of about 4 cars. Billions and billions are about to be spent just on, shall I use Ikemesit word, provisioning these ministers to work. And work how? In history, based on Nigeria's current status, being a minister has not necessarily led to very much good for the vast majority of the people. While these ministers existed, Nigeria rollicked at the head of the World Poverty Index. Now we are increasing the numbers. We are not telling anybody. The president has not told us what each of them is supposed to do. But it just looks like before it was when you finish being a governor, your retirement home is the Senate. Now your retirement home is in the cabinet of the FG. I really don't know whether many of these people, if you look at what they did in their states, especially the ex-governors, and look at the state of the people in their states, would those people be happy that that governor has performed well enough in the state to go and be quote unquote rewarded with a higher office? It looks like a bloated cabinet where they don't quite know what to do with these people, but they apparently helped in the election, so they are being rewarded with a cabinet post. I am not convinced that this large number is helping Nigeria.
But when you look at it from the standpoint that we have 36 states plus the FCT in the country, and each state must at least have a representation there. So you can see it more looks like some would say that you've got a constitutional backing for a bloated cabinet already. So we have to live with it.
37 is a far cry from 48.
Okay.
So already 37 was a problem in my view. Then when you now climb beyond 37 to go to 48, you ask yourself, for what? It is an absolute waste in my view.
37, I'm just looking at approximation. 37 approximately is 40, but I'm just saying, but your messages are here for you guys responding. So let's see what the messages are looking like this morning. Ken says, we have Ken here saying, good morning, all. Subsidy is gone, coup is gone. Tinubu has not rested ever since. Well, that's what he says in response. And I've got this one from Rexy. What are interests? If Russia gets in there before us, there goes our plans to pipe gas to Europe. Our future is at stake. That's how Rexy sees why we should go in there to put boots on ground in Niger Republic. And then Abbas Oladepo says, the headline is misleading. The Senate on its Twitter handle denied rejecting any approval of deployment of troops to Niger, as it wasn't in the place to approve or to reject, because that was not what was transmitted to them by the president. He only informed them that he's deploying troops to Niger as a mandate by the constitution. The media should always put up things in the right perspective. Kinetic option is the last measure after other options have been explored. And it is wrong to say that our military is ill-equipped. This narrative has been in the public sphere for too long. Our military is the fourth in Africa, so says Abbas. Well, we get to that in a while. I see Yemi from Marina. Good morning, guys. Please correct the analyst. It is not Nigeria versus Niger, but Niger and allies versus ECOWAS. I say we run the junta out and make an ECOWAS statement once and for all. We cannot afford to have a continent ruled by some juntas. God bless Nigeria, God bless Niger, and God bless Africa. Dami from Ikeja. A significant portion of the northern political and economic leadership trace their roots north all the way to Mauritania, no more than 3 generations old. The North is closer culturally, economically, and spiritually to Niger than they are to the rest of Nigeria. They have more to lose in the Nigerian crisis gets bloody than in multiple crises in other parts of the country. So there we go. Abi, any response so far from what we've seen?
Well, I did not say that the military was ill-equipped. It was actually the senators that are quoted as saying that.
Yeah.
And listen, you can argue it either way. I am saying it's very attractive to say, oh, let's go in all the bluster and beat these people out of the place. But there are laws of unintended consequences. And you have had times when you think you're going in. Compare Russia to Ukraine. Yeah. In terms of military might, it should have been a walkover, a week-long operation, as they call it, a special operation. A year has passed and the destruction is going on. A single life lost is not necessary. And don't forget, this will have one nuclear option. By the time they feel that they are being attacked, they can just take out the life of that former president, and then it's a 0-0 goalless draw. So you don't want that to happen. I think conversation is still the best way to go.
All right, having said that, we'll still stay with you on this one, and that's I'm going to Ikemesit now. To the Punch newspaper, Kano government to support 250 cooperative groups in that state. What say you, Ikemesit?
Yeah, so basically the special advisor to Governor Yusuf on cooperatives, yes, that's a thing. Jamilu Kiro was speaking to journalists yesterday about this, and he basically said that this was part of the Kano state government empowerment strategy to basically set up and financially support cooperative sectors that cover different trades where a disproportionate amount of economically impacted and poor people in Kano state, playing. So you're thinking, he specifically mentioned fields like agriculture, commerce, artisans, handicrafts, artisans, very widely interpreted, I would imagine, even though he did not define what he meant by artisans, and especially transportation. Very thin on details in terms of how the actual funding will actually occur, but he basically said that in a lot of these fields, the internet and the advent of technology and digitization has not really penetrated as much, and so the state government will be looking, or a lot of their focus would be to look to basically incorporate a lot of players in those spaces into sort of the 21st century way of doing things. The state would also help them with, finance and access to banking institutions so that they are able to access intervention funds, and then they are able to channel those resources into their businesses. And, there's a similar story, if we have time, that we'll get to, basically, happening in Oyo State, where the state government yesterday also announced, a series of packages. But in the light of the fuels, I'm just making a general point, which is that in the light of the fuel subsidy removal and in the light of the economic challenges, the domestic issues, right, the nation building at home that AB sort of alluding to many state governments as well as the federal government will have to come up with creative forms of supporting and empowering Nigerians to get through these times. And that should really be the predominant focus in the end.
Abi, a copy of the Vanguard newspaper is what is in front of you. And here they say the elevator crash that's coming back to Lagos. Lagos government sacks facility managers, suspends the GM, a human interest story. And this is still developing after the loss. It seemed like we always learn lessons and then we start to act after these things happen when we could have averted it.
Exactly my thinking from the story. Very reactive. And I'm curious that you're talking of trying to make things good, but they just say they have sacked and blacklisted the facility managers. Does this facility management company not have an identity, a name that can be understood? And I will assure you, having had occasion sometimes to work with some of these companies, they will have on their records assorted requests that they too may have made. You see, the facility management company has a stake in this right now. And I suspect very strongly that they will fight back and illustrate and demonstrate how assorted efforts that they may have made to keep those elevators and other facilities in place were thwarted by assorted government persons. So this story is actually just starting. But at the heart of it is the loss of a fellow Nigerian. Big or small, highly trained or not, when we lose even one of us, we've lost too many. And this was eminently, preventable. In other climes that we love to go to when we have ear aches and toothaches and other aches at our executive level, every single elevator in every town has a number inside it that you can call. If the elevator as much as hiccups, you can call that number and all sorts of people in the building will be in trouble. But here, I don't know what number I should call for errors that I see in any managerial situation. There can be opportunities we must take out of this very big tragedy. Let us set up that kind of communication link so that people know that they must be on their toes. And you cannot just, because you cannot keep an elevator going, just close it up, because people have a right to go up a 10-story building with an elevator. So there must be KPI. What kind of performance standards must you maintain in a modern building, and what safety standards? There's one question they said, and it really troubled me. Elevators, by their design, and mechanical engineers are experts on this, have fail-safe, so that even if a cable snaps, there's supposed to be automatic brakes and locks. For it to fall 8-9 stories meant that every single safety fail-safe had been compromised. How did that happen? We really need to get to the bottom of it and get to who was responsible for this tragedy. But it's not just enough now to be sacking people and making noises. We must go proactive. And I hear that now they're looking into other high-rise buildings. Please, let this sad death lead to some lawful consequences, and maybe an act can be passed in the state that is named after this sad, tragic event and the person who lost her life. It's all good to say. Please go on.
Just to put in, this is just to put a name to that the incident that's talking about Dr. Wairi Diasu, who lost her life just barely 2 weeks before she concludes her housemanship, and the sad loss. At a time when we need medical doctors, we are losing one at this time.
It boggles the mind, but it is sadly, as some people have described it, a typical case of Nigerian anyhowness that came adrift. We cannot afford further waste of lives.
Okay, so shall we just look at some more messages before I go to Ikemesit now? Ikemesit, just hold on for me a bit here. I see this one. Shegun says, I think the president doesn't want to fight a war, so it's strategic to use the Senate to avoid it. He can tell the warmongers that our Senate has refused to participate in a war in Niger. Nigeria has its own problems to deal with. That's according to Shegun. Emeka comes in with a message here from Ikeja. Our direct national interest in Niger stems from the feeling that we invested lots of infrastructure that are questionable and by extension a hideout for some corrupt investment by our past and present leaders. they want to fight to control of the investment. That's according to the message. Joseph Menyi goes on to say, good morning, freshly pressed. Your vibrant analysts, AB Bozimo and Ikemesit. Why is it very difficult for Nigeria to mind her business and solve our own internal problems plaguing her citizens? Let Niger solve their own problems. If they need help, UN and co will help, not Nigeria. The insensitivity and impunity is just the order of the day. Imagine our bloated ministries, yet citizens are to tighten up their belts. From Joseph Menye. Ajayi is here too. Good morning. It says the bloated cabinet being assembled by the president is uncalled for. What we expected is a drastic reduction in the size of government. And that's from Ajayi Olonilua from Magodo GRA Sherry. So Ikemesit, take us to that story where the Oyo State government is already working on subsidy removal, announces economic recovery, and tied up to that Kano story you were going to allude to, you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so, the program is called the Sustainable Actions for Economic Recovery, or SAFER, cute acronym. And basically, SAFER will target the poorest of the poor and vulnerable to ensure, and this is a direct quote, yeah, and ensure a softer landing for them. So under SAFER, agripreneurs, for example, who are trained under a particular government empowerment scheme will receive enterprise support of about 500 million naira. Public servants in Oyo have been protesting for some time. That has gone under the radar, right? A bit. In his address to Oyo residents, the governor said that the government will pay both the back pay of 2 months deductions that were owed workers, along with their salary for this month. And the government also, in order to better target, right, the most vulnerable in Oyo society, says it's updating the social register to capture what it thinks are about 200,000, right, of the most economically needy residents of the state. So a bit more detail than what you saw in Kano, but again, the larger undercurrents, right, and that underpins, the same undercurrent, and the larger undercurrent underpins, right, what's going on in both states, which is basically that because of the adverse economic conditions that Nigerians are facing, government has to be more hands-on, government has to be more intelligent and creative about how it designs these schemes. Remember the federal scheme, for example, we criticized because it's been very thin and short on detail. And the last time we tried it, it led to a lot of waste and leakage, right? So, hopefully at the subnational level, we begin to see models and we begin to see approaches which are innovative enough that we can scale, or at least the federal guys can take a cube of. But the general headspace and the general thinking, both in Kano and in Oyo, is somewhat commendable. I don't say this a lot on Freshly Pressed, especially of government functionaries. Yeah. Let's see what the actual execution will look like.
All right, Ikemesit, this is where we must draw the curtains on Freshly Pressed this morning. I want to say thank you to AB Bozimo for your time this morning.
Thank you. The pleasure and privilege are always mine. Do have a wonderful day.
You too. Ikemesit, well, we see you flying your jersey. We know the results.
It was a great weekend. It was a great weekend. Yes.
Ikemesit, that's it. So,
but thanks, Lagos.
All right. I want to say thank you to all those who sent in their messages. Tonye, I see Tonye from Ijesha. Thanks so much for the observation. We appreciate you, Tonye. Idima Puza, Yinka Bolu, Fabian, Delewad, Seratu, Austin, Deja Vu, Abbas, Oladejo. We thank you all for your time this morning. It's still smooth 98.1 FM.